friends, welcome back to Food Prep Guide. It is almost preservation season, so I want to share some no-waste techniques that have changed how I preserve food. I used to think food scraps were just scraps that got tossed into my compost pile or to the chickens, but then I started playing around with preservation techniques that use the whole plant wherever possible for zero waste preservation projects. So today I'm sharing 5 techniques that turn the parts you would normally discard into pantry staples that people pay pretty good money for at the grocery store. We're talking about the tops of plants that become seasonings, peels that transform into something sweet and spreadable, and scraps that turn into powders with more nutrition than most supplements. If you want to maximize your garden harvest or summer produce deals, hang out with me for a few minutes and you'll walk away with 5 new ways to create pantry staples from things that would otherwise be tossed. Let's start with technique number 1.
Welcome to Food Prep Guide. My name is Jordan. I'm a homeschooling mom to 3, living on 3 beautiful acres with my wonderful husband. A health crisis forced our family to change the way we think about food. Unfortunately, it also put us in financial hardship. Thankfully, the solution to both challenges was the same: to live off the land as much as possible. For us, that means growing a garden, preserving the harvest, raising chickens, and cooking from scratch. It's definitely a family affair. And friends, too. Meet Stacy, researcher, author, and lifelong learner. She entered the world of food preservation in the crazy days of 2020. She joined a gleaning co-op, and a local grocer offered her clearance produce in bulk, and so the adventure began. Together, we're reclaiming the old ways of food stewardship and teaching them to the next generation. If there's one thing you should know about us, it's that we love Jesus and seek to steward his blessings wisely. Our table always has room for one more, so y'all come join us.
First up is carrot tops. Contrary to what you may have heard or read online, carrot tops are completely edible and they taste remarkably similar to parsley with just a slightly more earthy and maybe a little bit of a peppery flavor. And let me tell you how I discovered this. It was my first year growing carrots successfully, and I had a massive pile of carrot tops. And it kind of hurt my heart a little to just toss it all out to the animals. So out of curiosity, I bit into one and was amazed at how similar it was to parsley. I did a little research to ensure it was safe, and I found that not only were carrot tops perfectly safe to eat, but people use them for all sorts of things. The main thing being carrot top pesto of all things. Now, we really love our basil-based pesto, so I wasn't interested in that, but I was absolutely interested in increasing my stock of herbs. So the key is choosing the right carrot tops. You want them to be bright green and fresh looking, not yellow or wilted. If you're buying carrots at the grocery store, look for bunches where the tops are still pretty perky and vibrant. Start by giving them a really good wash. They can hold on to dirt just like any other leafy green. I actually generally wash them twice and run them through my salad spinner because they can get pretty gritty. After washing, shake off the excess water and then sort through them, removing any tough stems or damaged leaves. The tender stems are fine to include, but the really thick woody ones are the ones that are really bitter. Then just spread the leaves out on dehydrator trays. If you don't have a dehydrator, you can absolutely do this in your oven on the lowest setting possible with the door cracked open a bit. One thing I've learned is that you don't want to overcrowd your dehydrator trays. Give the leaves some space so air can circulate properly. If they're too bunched up, some pieces will dry while others stay damp and you'll end up with inconsistent results. Once they're completely dry and crispy, usually takes about 6 hours in the dehydrator, although it just depends on many factors, I crumble them up and store them in a mason jar that I then vacuum seal. The flavor concentrates beautifully, and honestly, most people can't tell the difference between this and dried parsley when I use it in cooking, and we use parsley a lot, especially in our homemade cream of chicken soups. Here's a tip: I actually make herb blends with my dried carrot tops. I'll mix them with dried oregano, thyme, and garlic powder to make like an all-purpose garden blend. It's really good on roasted vegetables or even mixed into olive oil for dipping bread. I also use it in everything from soups, stews, pasta dishes, and of course herb blends like I mentioned. It's fantastic and completely free if you're already buying carrots with the tops on or if you grow them. One thing that's really interesting to note is that carrot tops are often more nutritious than the carrots themselves. They're packed with vitamin K, vitamin C, and potassium, so you're not just saving money and reducing waste, you're actually adding nutrition to your cooking. Okay, technique number 2 is one of my absolute favorites, and that is making fruit butter from the skins or the peels. I'm using peach skins here, but this works beautifully with apple peels, pear peels, and really any fruit with edible skin. I've made incredible apple butter from just the peels after making applesauce, and pear butter from the pear peels, even plum butter. Each one has its own unique character, but the process is exactly the same. So here's what you need to know about collecting the skins. If you're doing this over several days, like maybe you're eating peaches throughout the whole month, you can freeze the skins as you go. So you don't necessarily have to wait until you're doing like this big, massive preservation project. Just toss them in a freezer bag and they will actually break down even better when you go to cook them from a frozen state. I usually wait until I have about at least 5 cups of skin before I make a batch. Simply toss all the fruit skins into a crock pot and add a splash of water with 1 to 2 cups of sugar, 1 tablespoon of lemon juice, 1 teaspoon vanilla extract, 1 teaspoon ground cinnamon, and half a teaspoon of pumpkin pie spice or just plain nutmeg. The water amount doesn't need to be precise, it just needs to be enough to prevent sticking. Probably a quarter of a cup of water for a big batch of skins would be my best guess. Then I cook it on low for about 4 to 6 hours until everything breaks down. The house smells absolutely incredible during this process, and what's happening is the heat is breaking down the cell walls in the skin and releasing all of that concentrated flavor and natural pectin. If you don't have a crock pot, you can absolutely do this on the stove top. Just use a heavy bottomed pot on low heat and stir frequently, and just know that you'll need to watch it more carefully to prevent burning. Once everything is softened and cooked down a bit, I run my immersion blender through it until it reaches a smooth, buttery consistency. If you don't have an immersion blender, you can use a regular strainer and push the mixture through with the back of a spoon. What you're left with is a gorgeous, smooth puree that tastes like a concentrated peach flavor or whatever fruit that you're using. Speaking of different fruits, for apple peels, I usually pair it with a little bit of cinnamon. For pear peels, vanilla and a pinch of cardamom is wonderful. And when it comes to spices, you can customize it however you want. Fruit butter will keep in the fridge for weeks, and it's incredible on toast, stirred into oatmeal, swirled into yogurt, or even as a filling for pastries and cobblers. I've even used it as a glaze for pork chops and mixed into muffin batter, or stirred into cream cheese for a quick fruit dip. The best part is it costs pennies to make and tastes better than anything you're going to buy at the store. Plus, you know exactly what's in it. No weird preservatives or artificial flavors. If you want to can it, you certainly can. That's what I do. You want to fill your jars to a 1/4-inch headspace and water bath can for 15 minutes. That's for peaches. Be sure to look up your times for different types of fruits, and be sure to check your elevation to see if you need to add any more time to that. This is not a comprehensive canning lesson type video. Okay, moving on to number 3 is onion powder made from the tops of regular bulbing onions. This is one of those techniques that really opened my eyes to how much I had been wasting without even thinking about it. We grow around 100 pounds of onions each year, and I used to cut off the green tops and toss them straight out to my animals. But those tops are essentially free onion flavoring that's just a little bit more mild than the bulb. But it still has a lovely and definitely recognizable onion flavor. When you dehydrate them, they become a seasoning that's somewhere between onion powder and chives in their flavor profile. Now, if you're buying onions from the grocery store, you don't always find the onions with the top still on them. In fact, that's pretty rare. But farmers markets and farm stands often leave them on, especially in early summer when the onions are being harvested. I start off by cutting the tops off the onions. Usually I cut them about an inch above where the bulb starts to swell, and then wash them really well. The process is almost identical to dehydrating carrot tops. So after you wash them off really well, just shake off any excess water, pat them dry, and then I chop them into smaller pieces, maybe about an inch long or so. This just helps them dry more evenly and makes the drying process faster. I spread them out on my dehydrator trays, making sure that they're not overlapping, and they usually run for about 8 hours in the dehydrator, but you let it run until they're completely dry and crispy. You'll know they're done when they crumble easily between your fingers and there's no moisture left at all. If they're still flexible or feel kind of chewy, they need to dry some more. Under-dried onion tops won't powder properly, they'll get all clumpy and then they'll go bad in storage. But once they're completely dry, I grind them in my Vitamix dry container. But you can use a spice grinder, even a coffee grinder, a food processor, just something that will allow you to achieve a fine powder. This can take a few minutes because onion tops can be pretty fibrous, but if you're using a spice grinder or a coffee grinder, you'll want to work in smaller batches. One thing I learned is that to clean whatever grinder or processor you're using really, really well with hot soapy water afterwards, because the onion flavor is surprisingly strong and will transfer to whatever you grind next. By the way, if you have a freeze dryer, it makes a beautiful fine ground onion powder as well. We've done them both ways. But we use this in salad dressings, soup blends, and seasoning mixes, just like the carrot top powder for roasted vegetables and such. I've also seen people use it to make compound butter. Just mix it with some softened butter and maybe some garlic powder. That's great spread on bread. It can also be mixed into sour cream for a quick onion dip. We do that all the time. We store our onion powder vacuum sealed in mason jars, and it has always lasted us until the next onion harvest time the following year. And really, as long as it's been properly dried and stored, there's no reason it couldn't last even longer on the shelf than that. Okay, technique number 4 is probably the most nutritious thing we will discuss today, and that is a super greens powder from the outer cabbage leaves and other vegetables, which we'll discuss in just a second. This is one of those techniques that makes me feel like I've cracked some kind of secret code. For years, I was throwing away such a nutritious part of cabbage and other plants without even thinking about it. But those outer leaves of cabbage are tough because they've been working hard protecting the inner leaves from sun and wind and weather, but they are incredibly rich in vitamins and minerals. The outer leaves are almost always darker than the inner ones, and that deeper color is a sign of higher chlorophyll content and more nutrients. We're talking significantly higher levels of vitamin K, vitamin C, folate, and antioxidants compared to the pale inner leaves that we usually eat. And this preservation method works for so many things. Beet greens, highly, highly nutritious. Broccoli leaves, kale stems, even radish tops, even though they're a little peppery. Turnip greens, collard green stems, basically any green that's too tough to eat fresh, but still densely nutritious and worthwhile to use. As with all foods, we need to start by washing them really well and removing any damaged parts. With cabbage leaves, I sometimes remove the really thick central rib because it can be pretty fibrous. But if the cabbage leaves happen to have smaller type inner stems, then I'll just leave them. They're fine to include. With a pair of kitchen shears, I will cut them into smaller pieces so they'll dry more evenly, around 2 to 3 inches sections or so. And then into the dehydrator they go. Also, everything mentioned in this video, we dry at 125 to 130 degrees Fahrenheit. That's where my dehydrator temperature stays. Pretty much everything except for meat gets dehydrated in that range. But these usually take me about 8 to 10 hours to dry because they're quite thick and fibrous. The timing can vary a lot depending on how thick the leaves are and how humid your environment is at the time of dehydrating. But once they are bone dry, I will grind them again in my high-speed blender until they're a fine powder. And the key is just to get as fine as possible because those coarse pieces won't blend well into smoothies and they can be kind of gritty in other applications. So if your equipment isn't quite powerful enough to get a really fine powder, you can always run it through a fine mesh strainer afterward to remove any larger pieces that just wouldn't break down. What you end up with is a gorgeous green powder that is packed with vitamins, mineral, and fiber. I add this to smoothies, about half a tablespoon to a tablespoon, and it has a slight earthy kind of mineral taste, but it really kind of gets hidden if you have any kind of fruits in your smoothies. And even something like cocoa powder can kind of mask that taste as well. I also stir it into soups at the end of cooking, mix it into salad dressings, and even add it to homemade pasta for fun green noodles and added nutrition. It's basically a homemade superfood supplement that would cost you $20 or more at the health food store, but you know exactly what's in it. Plus, you're using parts of the plant that would otherwise go to waste, so you're getting maximum nutrition. The next project is corn cob syrup. Now, you may have heard of corn cob jelly, but we really don't need any more jellies and jams. So we do need a pancake syrup, and that's what corn cob syrup tastes like. It tastes very similar to pancake syrup. So the first thing we need to do is just add enough water to our pot to pretty much cover those corn cobs, ever how many corn cobs you're going to be working with. We need to bring that up to a rolling boil. And once it's at a boil, it needs to boil for about 30 minutes straight. And then after that point, you want to keep the lid on throughout this entire process. But after it's been boiling for 30 minutes, we then need to lower it down to a simmer and let it simmer for an hour straight. So I mentioned that corncob jelly is popular as well, and all you would need for that is pectin, and there's plenty of recipes online for that if you're more interested in making jelly than you are syrup. But this is just an excellent replacement for pancake syrup. So once that syrup or the corn cobs has been simmering for about an hour, you just need to remove all the corn cobs, and so that we're left with essentially the corn cob juice. At this point, the corn cobs are officially spent, and I personally don't know anything else that we can use them for. So I usually just toss these out to my chickens. They absolutely love them. Having it soaked in that water just makes it even easier for their little beaks to pick off anything remaining. But these could go into your compost pile too, although I think they would take a really long time to break down, so the chickens is the best option for me. So the next step is to strain the juice. Just like when we're making any kind of jelly, any kind of syrup, you want to strain the juice so that we're left with a pure product that doesn't have any little bits and pieces of the vegetable or fruit remaining in it. I always use a nut milk bag. You can use cheesecloth. You can use just a regular strainer and put some paper towels down on the strainer and pour it through on top of the paper towels. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. But basically, you're just essentially trying to separate a pure juice apart from bits and pieces. One of the ways that I have found has worked the best for me is doing this around an area in front of my kitchen cabinets with like the doorknobs, and use the doorknobs as like a hook to hook the nut milk bag. That's why I really enjoy using this nut milk bag, because it gives me kind of a hands-off way to strain the syrup, so I don't have to stand there and wait for it to strain, because it can take 10-15 minutes or so, which isn't super long, of course, but there's some other things that I could be doing in the kitchen during that time. And so I usually just twist it around and just continue twisting it until I can get as much of that juice out as possible. Sometimes it's entirely too hot to touch and I need to use some tongs. Otherwise, it's fine, but just use some way to separate that juice. Once that juice is separated, we need to go ahead and put it back onto our pot and get our eye on high heat so that we can bring this juice back up to a boil. And once it is boiling, we can go ahead and add our sugar. Basically, what you want to do when you're making any kind of syrups is to do equal parts juice and syrup. I ended up having approximately 7 cups of corn juice, and I ended up only putting about 5 cups of sugar in it. And that kind of goes against what I just said about equal parts, but I'm okay with having less sugar and not quite as thick of a syrup. This is going to be strictly pancake syrup, and we don't mind it being a little runny anyway. It's that flavor that we're going for. But just know that you pretty much want equal parts juice and sugar when you're making any kind of syrups. So once it is boiling, you basically want to boil it down until it is half of the volume that it was before. And you want to use like a meat thermometer or a bread thermometer or something like that. And the goal that we're working towards is 220 degrees Fahrenheit. So we're looking for 2 things when we're making syrup: that it boils down to half of its volume, and that it gets to about 220 degrees Fahrenheit. So we are finally at that point. It took about an hour to get to that point for me. But once you are at that point, you can remove it from heat and start filling your jars. You do want to have your jars already prepped and ready at this point, because that is super hot syrup, obviously, and we don't want that going into cold jars. I'm going to be using my steam canner for this, because anything that only has to process for a pretty short amount of time, like 10 minutes or so, I love the steam canner because it comes up to heat so much faster than a water bath canner, and it just makes the whole processing go quicker. I can usually get 2 runs of my steam canner done in the amount of time that it takes for 1 run in my water bath canner. So I've got that steam canner prepping. My hot jars work. I just pulled the jars out of the dishwasher that was sitting on heat. Had just finished the heat cycle, so they're nice and hot. And now we're just filling up the jars to a half-inch or a quarter-inch headspace. I almost always do half-inch, but technically you can go to a quarter-inch headspace if you like. Next step is just to debubble. And then we will wipe our rims with a clean, wet paper towel or dish rag. Syrup is very, very sticky, so I usually take my time and really make sure I wipe my rims good. And next we need to put on clean lids and then our rings to fingertip tight. I go to the point of resistance and then just a quarter turn more. Picture the hands on a clock and you would go from 12 to 3. That's what I mean by quarter turn. When we are loading the steam canner, we don't have to load it any certain way. There's no certain pattern or anything you need to follow. Just you don't want the jars to be smushed up next to each other. Jars up next to each other increase your risk of the jars shattering during the canning process. So as long as there's just a little bit of space between each jar, you're good to go. I wanted to show you the consistency of the syrup because when you load it into the jars, it is going to be very liquidy and it's going to seem like it's not syrup at all. But once it cools, this is the texture that you get. So with a steam canner, you wait to start your processing time until your needle is in the green zone for your elevation. I just hit that point. So now I am setting the timer, the processing time for 10 minutes. Be sure to adjust for your elevation. And here is what they look like. I went ahead and turned off the heat. When the processing time was over, I turned the heat off and I let them sit there for 5 to 10 minutes before I removed the lid. Here's what they looked like. They still look very liquidy at this stage, but remember, once they cool, they will thicken up. And there you have it. These are some of the most common ways that I try to use every part of the plant when possible and really maximize my harvest and get as many jars on my shelf out of each plant as possible. I hope this was helpful to you, and that's all for today. We will see you next time. Bye!